Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Moana 2, 2024, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. The sun rises over a vast, glittering ocean, casting golden ribbons across waves that seem to stretch forever. Somewhere beyond that horizon, adventure waits, calling to the ones who cannot ignore its voice. This time, the ocean's call feels even deeper, even stronger, as a new journey unfolds, filled with unfamiliar shores, ancient mysteries, and choices that could reshape entire worlds. What once was the story of finding one's place now becomes the story of what happens after, when destiny is not a question of arrival, but a matter of continuing to choose, every single day. The tale that opens here is not one of comfort. It is a story of a restless heart, of an ocean that refuses to stay still, and of a legacy that demands more than simple stewardship. It is a tale about what it truly means to lead, to protect, and to listen, not just to the voices of the past, but to the whispers of tomorrow. The familiar face returns to us with the same fierce spark in her eyes, but there's a weight now too, a heaviness that comes from carrying the hopes of an entire people on your shoulders. As the new chief of her island, she faces a world that is shifting beneath her feet. Old currents no longer carry the same promises. The fish are scarce. The winds, once faithful companions, now behave like strangers. The ocean itself feels different, as if it's holding its breath, waiting for something. When ancient signs begin to reveal themselves, stars rearranging, sea creatures migrating in strange patterns, the islands trembling in the night, it becomes clear that something larger is stirring. Legends spoken in hushed tones around firelight whisper of a force older than the ocean itself, something that slumbers beneath the waves and dreams in tides. It is not malevolent, but it is powerful beyond imagining. And now it is waking. Torn between the demands of her people and the call of the unknown, the young chief faces a choice. Stay, anchor her people against the changing tides, or sail once more into the vastness to find the source of the unrest and bring balance before everything unravels. The decision is not simple. It is easy to be brave when you are seeking your destiny. It is far harder when the lives of those you love most are tied to your every step. She does not leave alone. From the far corners of the ocean, allies gather, some familiar, some entirely new. A certain boisterous demigod, once banished and redeemed, answers the call with reluctant humor and hidden fear. Time has changed him, too, though he hides it beneath layers of bravado. New companions join them as well, a navigator whose heart belongs more to the stars than the sea, a trickster spirit wearing 1,000 faces, and an elder guardian whose wisdom is tempered by wounds no one can see. Their journey takes them beyond known waters, into realms charted only in the oldest songs. Islands that breathe and move beneath the waves. Reefs that bloom into living labyrinths. Storms that sing warnings in voices that sound almost human. With every mile, the ocean reveals itself to be stranger and more alive than they ever dared dream. And yet, the greatest challenges lie not in the monsters they face or the treacherous waters they cross, but within. For the deeper they sail, the clearer it becomes that the unrest in the ocean is tied to them, to choices made long ago and forgotten, to promises broken by ancestors whose names have faded into legend. It is not an enemy they must defeat, but a wound they must heal, a reckoning with a past they barely understand. As ancient forces stir, the ocean itself begins to turn against them. Tides that once guided now seek to drown. Winds howl with anger rather than blessing. Even the stars seem to twist away from familiar paths, leaving them adrift in a vast, indifferent expanse. Doubt creeps in like cold water, chilling resolve. The navigator questions the stars he once trusted. The demigod wrestles with guilt buried under centuries of swagger. And the young chief herself wonders whether she ever truly understood what the ocean was asking of her. In the heart of this uncertainty rises a figure cloaked in mist and tide, neither villain nor hero, but something older, something elemental. It offers power, knowledge, safety. It whispers of a world where the ocean bends to her will, where her people would never suffer again. The temptation cuts deep, stirs fears she thought she had conquered long ago. But she remembers that leadership is not about control. That true strength lies not in bending the world to your will, but in standing against the storm when others falter. It is in listening, truly listening, to the voice beneath the roar, the voice that calls not for dominion, but for balance. The climax comes not with a clash of armies or a battle of might, but with a choice, the hardest, simplest choice of all. To trust, to let go, to believe in the ocean, in her people, in herself, even when every instinct screams otherwise. In the end, it is not victory that defines her, but resilience. The world is not healed with a single act. The tides still churn. The winds still roar. But a new path opens, one built on understanding rather than fear, on partnership rather than conquest. A path that acknowledges the mistakes of the past and dares to chart a better course forward. As the final scenes unfold, there is a bittersweet beauty to it all. Not every question is answered. Not every wound is mended. But there is hope, fierce, stubborn, radiant hope, blooming like coral in a devastated reef, resilient and aching and alive. And through it all, the ocean sings. It sings not of endings, but of journeys yet to come. It sings of a young chief who was once a girl defying her destiny, now a leader shaping it with hands weathered by storms and a heart steady enough to carry 1,000 dreams. It sings of a world too beautiful, too fragile, and too fierce to be ruled, only loved. And it leaves us with the quiet, electrifying reminder that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to set our sails once more, even when the shore disappears behind us and the stars seem to falter. Because the ocean is always calling. And there are always new horizons waiting just beyond the edge of the world. The ocean stretched out before her like an endless living mirror, a surface glittering with secrets and songs only she seemed able to hear. Standing at the edge of her island, where the waves kissed the sand in familiar, soothing rhythms, she felt the tug in her heart that had never quite gone away. It was a call, deeper and more insistent than the one that had once sent her sailing beyond the reef all those years ago. But now, it was not just curiosity or destiny that pulled at her, it was responsibility. As the newly anointed chief, life on the island had changed in ways she had not expected. Leadership was a weight she carried with pride, but also with increasing unease. The crops were slower to grow. The fishing grounds, once bountiful, now yielded meager catches. The winds that had once been loyal companions now shifted unpredictably, carrying with them an air of disquiet. At first, she tried to dismiss the signs as natural fluctuations. Seasons changed, waters moved.
One evening, during a traditional gathering under the stars, the elders spoke in hushed, troubled tones. They recounted tales older than even the first voyages, stories of the ocean itself growing restless when the balance of life was threatened, stars rearranging in the sky, islands trembling in their slumber, creatures of the deep stirring from ancient dreams. It was not fear she saw in the elders' eyes, but sorrow, a weary recognition of something long feared but seldom spoken aloud. In the weeks that followed, the signs grew harder to ignore. Schools of fish migrated in strange, frantic patterns. Whales breached closer to shore than ever before, their haunting songs filled with a note of panic. Coral reefs that had once bloomed in brilliant colors faded and withered like old parchment. One night, as she gazed up at the sky from her canoe, she watched a cluster of stars pulse and shift before her eyes, forming a symbol she recognized from a childhood lullaby. The mark of the tides, a sign of great change and great danger. She knew then that staying on the island, tending crops and mending nets, would not be enough. The ocean was calling her again, not just as a daughter, but as a guardian. Gathering her people, she spoke with the steady, measured voice of a leader who had fought for their trust. She told them she would leave, but not to abandon them. She would seek the source of the ocean's unrest, find a way to heal the waters, and return with the knowledge they would need to thrive once more. Her people listened, torn between fear and pride, their faces lit by the flickering firelight. Her father, once reluctant to let her sail beyond the reef, now gripped her shoulder and nodded, silent but resolute. The voyage began at dawn. With the rising sun painting the sky in crimson and gold, she pushed her canoe into the waves, the familiar salt spray baptizing her anew. But she would not sail alone for long. Before the horizon swallowed the island from view, a gust of wind and a flash of tattoos heralded the arrival of a larger-than-life companion. The demigod, once lost and redeemed, bounded aboard her vessel with a grin too big for the morning and a heart heavier than he let on. His arrival was not entirely unexpected. Legends had a way of circling back to those who needed them most. Their reunion was filled with playful barbs and unspoken warmth. Time had changed them both. He still boasted of his deeds, still flexed his magical prowess with dramatic flair, but there was a deeper humility to him now, a subtle sorrow behind the bravado. He, too, had heard whispers on the wind, felt the ocean's unease prickling at the edges of his vast, shape-shifting spirit. Together, they sailed beyond the familiar currents, where the waters deepened into a shade of blue, so dark it seemed almost black. Here, the ocean grew unpredictable, its moods shifting from placid to tempestuous without warning. Storms rose with unnatural speed, and creatures unseen stirred beneath the surface. On more than one occasion, the sea tested their resolve with waves that towered like mountains and winds that howled like mourning spirits. Along their journey, they sought wisdom from the oldest sources they knew. At a hidden island cloaked in mist, they found a navigator, a young man whose lineage traced back to the first voyagers, those ancient wayfinders who had once mapped the vast Pacific with only the stars and the ocean's whispers as their guide. He wore around his neck a relic, a shard of obsidian etched with symbols no one alive could fully read. He spoke of disturbances he had seen, reefs that uprooted themselves and drifted like ghost ships, currents that reversed their flow as if time itself had stuttered. Reluctantly at first, the navigator agreed to join them, bringing his knowledge of forgotten constellations and secret currents. Yet even he, with all his skill, seemed unnerved by the signs they encountered. Flocks of seabirds migrating inland instead of to the coasts, whirlpools forming in placid lagoons, and stars that dimmed at their edges as if something vast and unseen blotted out the heavens. One evening, as they anchored near an island overgrown with phosphorescent vines, they encountered another traveler, a being neither fully human nor spirit, a trickster with 1,000 faces and a laugh like breaking glass. It offered guidance, riddles, and half-truths in exchange for offerings, a carved shell, a woven lay, a whispered secret. Despite its capricious nature, they had little choice but to accept its aid. In a world where even the ocean itself seemed unsure of its loyalties, alliances were forged not from trust, but necessity. Their path led them to an ancient temple carved into the side of a cliff, so weathered by time that it seemed part of the rock itself. Here, beneath mosaics depicting gods and monsters locked in eternal struggle, they found a warning etched in stone. The ocean is not a force to be tamed. Those who seek to command it, to bend it to their will, awaken forces beyond imagining. It was a revelation that weighed heavily on them all. Not long after, during a voyage across eerily calm waters, they faced their first true test. From the depths rose a leviathan, a creature of bone and coral, stitched together from centuries of shipwrecks and drowned dreams. It was not alive in the traditional sense, but animated by the same restless energy that roiled beneath the waves. Battling the beast was a desperate, harrowing affair. Magic, cunning, and brute strength barely sufficed. In the end, it was not violence that defeated the creature, but compassion, a realization that it was not attacking out of malice, but confusion, pain. The young chief, remembering the lessons of her ancestors, calmed the beast with song, a lullaby her grandmother had once sung to the stars. The creature, shuddering, sank back into the depths, leaving behind a trail of bioluminescent tears that lit their path forward. But victory came at a price. The ocean grew colder in its aftermath, the currents angrier, more treacherous. Doubt seeped into their little crew. Was the disturbance they sought to heal something far older, far deeper, than anything they could hope to understand? And if so, were they sailing towards salvation or destruction? Night after night, the stars overhead seemed to twist and writhe, reshaping themselves into unfamiliar patterns. Dreams grew darker, filled with visions of islands swallowed by the sea, of skies torn open by storms that bled fire. In the quiet moments between battles and storms, they spoke of their fears. The navigator questioning the maps handed down through generations, the demigod haunted by a past full of hubris and abandoned promises, the trickster growing more erratic, as if sensing the unraveling of the world's hidden threads. And through it all, the The young chief wrestled with her greatest fear, that she had led them all into a journey with no way home. Yet in the face of despair, she clung to a single truth. The ocean had chosen her once, and it was still choosing her, even now. Not because she was infallible, not because she was fearless, but because she dared to listen when others turned away. As their battered canoe crested a final wave, and the horizon split open to reveal a churning maelstrom unlike anything they had ever seen, she knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it not as saviors, not as conquerors, but as stewards of a fragile, precious world teetering between ruin and renewal. The first leg of their journey had stripped them of illusions, but had also revealed something far stronger than certainty. Faith, in each other, in the ocean, and in the power of choosing, again and again, to believe. The winds howled like living things as the canoe was swallowed by the storm's towering maw, tossed like a toy between walls of water that seemed determined to break the very sky apart. Lightning split the darkness again and again, illuminating the terror on their faces. But even amid the chaos, the young chief stood firm, her hands tight on the ropes, her voice steady as she shouted orders against the roar. The ocean was no longer the gentle companion of old. It was a wounded, raging giant, and it demanded to know whether they were truly worthy to pass. By sheer will and instinct sharpened into something closer to faith, they survived the night. When the storm finally spat them out, they found themselves drifting toward a place that no map had ever dared mark. A horizon where the sea met not sky but mist, thick silver, breathing mist that swallowed sound and sense alike. Here, the waters were unnaturally still, heavy with a silence so profound it pressed against their skin. Even the demigod, who once mocked fear as if it were a boring guest at a party, fell into an uneasy quiet. Their navigator charted a path by feeling rather than sight, guided by instincts honed over generations. The trickster spirit, more subdued than ever before, warned of things that could not be seen, of promises and curses that twisted together like kelp beneath the surface. They had crossed into the heart of the mystery, a place where the rules of the world they knew no longer applied. At the center of the mist, they found it, the source of the ocean's unrest. Not a monster, not a god, but an island unlike any they had ever seen, alive, aware, and in pain. Its shores shifted underfoot, pulsing with strange energy. Trees that seemed to breathe, cliffs that rearranged themselves when unobserved, rivers that sang mournful songs. It was not evil, but it was broken, caught in a slow spiral of decay and anger. And it was the island itself that had begun to lash out at the world, distorting tides, stirring storms, disrupting the delicate balance that held the ocean together. The truth, pieced together from fragments of legend and whispered memories, was almost too much to bear. Long ago, before the first voyagers ever set sail, there had been a pact, a living agreement between the ocean and the land, brokered by the first navigators who understood that neither could thrive without the other. But as time passed and people spread across the seas, growing bolder and more numerous, the old ways were forgotten. Islands were stripped, waters polluted, the rhythms of life disrupted in 1,000 thoughtless ways. And with each broken promise, each forgotten song, the living island weakened, until pain and confusion turned into a force of unmaking. Standing on the breathing earth, the young chief felt the weight of all those lost promises settle on her shoulders. This was not a curse laid by enemies or gods. It was the price of forgetting. As she explored the shifting island, she encountered visions, fragments of the past preserved like echoes in the mist. She saw ancient navigators singing lullabies to the waves, planting trees with hands worn raw, honoring the old pact. She saw later generations who forgot, who took without giving back, until the songs faded and silence took their place. One vision struck her deepest, a reflection of herself, older, wearier, standing at the edge of her own island, choosing whether to remember or to let the past drift away. It was a warning and a challenge. Meanwhile, the demigod struggled with his own ghosts. He had once claimed dominion over sea and sky, taken power without understanding the cost. Now, facing the living island's sorrow, he saw his own arrogance mirrored back at him. For perhaps the first time, he offered no jokes, no grandiose boasts, only quiet remorse and a vow to do better. But even as understanding dawned, danger loomed. The trickster spirit, ever unpredictable, revealed a hidden agenda. Drawn by the island's power, it sought to claim the energy for itself, to weave new realities from the broken threads. Its true form, neither human nor divine, emerged from the mist, something ancient and shifting, a being of endless hunger masked by laughter. A furious battle erupted, not of armies or brute strength, but of will and memory. The trickster twisted the island against them, summoning tempests and illusions, reshaping the land into impossible mazes. Each member of their crew faced personal trials, visions designed to break their resolve. The navigator was shown a future where his people vanished, forgotten by the stars. The demigod relived every failure, every betrayal. The young chief stood before an empty island, her people gone, her dreams turned to dust. It would have been so easy to give in, to surrender to despair. But somewhere deep within, the young chief remembered the songs of her ancestors. Not just the songs of triumph, but the songs of endurance. Songs sung through storms, through famines, through loss. She began to sing, not loudly, not perfectly, but with the steady, stubborn voice of someone who refuses to be silenced. Her song wove through the mist, unmaking the trickster's illusions. One by one, her companions found their way back to her, anchoring themselves to the truth of who they were and who they chose to be. Together, they confronted the trickster, not with violence, but with understanding. They offered it a place, a role in the balance, rather than an enemy to be defeated. It was a risk, one that could have cost them everything. But the trickster, sensing something it had long since forgotten, belonging, accepted. Defeated. It was a risk, one that could have cost them everything. But the trickster, sensing something it had long since forgotten, belonging, accepted. Slowly, reluctantly, it withdrew its chaos, allowing the island to breathe again. Yet healing was not immediate. The living island remained wounded, its rhythms still fragile. The crew set to work, planting trees, cleansing rivers, repairing the ancient markers that once sang to the stars. Their labor was not glamorous, not the stuff of legends, but it was necessary. With each act of care, the island's heartbeat grew stronger, steadier. As they worked, the ocean's mood began to shift. The winds calmed. The tides returned to their familiar dance. Whales sang joyful songs in the deep. Life stirred in the reefs once more. When it came time to leave, the young chief knelt upon the breathing earth and placed her hand against it, feeling the pulse of life, fragile but fierce. She made a new promise, not just for herself, but for all those who would come after. A vow to remember, to honor the pact, to walk forward without forgetting the songlines that tied them to the ocean and the land. Their journey home was slower, gentler. The stars, once jumbled and broken, now gleamed clear and bright, guiding them with steady light. The navigator, once burdened by doubt, read their patterns with confidence restored. The demigod, once haunted by guilt, found laughter again, softer, wiser, but no less true. And the young chief, once fearful of her own worth, stood at the prow of the canoe, her heart steady with the knowledge that leadership is not about knowing all the answers, but about listening, adapting, and choosing again and again to believe in something larger than oneself. When they finally sighted their home island, it was as if the ocean itself sighed with relief. Their people welcomed them not as saviors, but as family returned. Stories were shared. Songs were sung anew, old melodies blended with new verses to honor the journey they had undertaken. The traditions of the past were not abandoned, but reimagined, woven into a future where the pact between ocean, land, and people could thrive once more. As the sun dipped low and painted the waves in fire and gold, the young chief stood once more at the water's edge, feeling the pulse of the world steady beneath her feet. She knew the ocean's call would never truly fade. There would always be new storms, new journeys, new choices. But now she understood. The call was not a summons to leave, but an invitation to belong, fiercely, fully, and forever. And so, with the stars overhead singing their endless song, she smiled, knowing that the greatest adventure was not out there beyond the horizon, but here, in every choice made with open hands and an open heart. And somewhere, deep beneath the waves, the ocean smiled back. Every great story lives and breathes through its characters, and this journey across ancient seas and restless horizons was no exception. Here, the characters were more than players moving across a grand stage. They were the heartbeat of the story itself, vessels of ancient songs and new dreams, fractured souls stitched together by purpose, choice, and the aching need to belong. To know them is to understand the waves that carried them, the winds that tested them, and the quiet stars that watched them from above. At the very center of this tale stood the young chief, once a wide-eyed voyager driven by a fierce need to know her place in the world. Years have passed, and though she now bears the mantle of leadership, the fire within her remains untamed. Yet it is no longer the reckless fire of youth. It is tempered now, deepened by responsibility and grief, by the countless small sacrifices that leadership demands. She stands not as a conqueror or a savior, but as a bridge between what was and what must come. What defines her in this story is not her ability to command or to conquer, but her willingness to listen, truly listen, to the ocean, to her ancestors, to the fears and hopes of her people. It is a humbler, harder kind of heroism, one forged not in battles won, but in choices made when no easy path lies ahead. Throughout the journey, she wrestles with doubt, with the gnawing fear that she might lead her people into ruin. Yet she never allows fear to calcify into an action. Instead, she leans into it, wears it like armor, and transforms it into courage. Her relationship with the ocean deepens, too. No longer is the sea simply an ally or a means of escape. It becomes a living memory, a teacher, a reflection of her own inner turmoil. When the waves rage and the tides twist against her, it is not punishment but a challenge, a demand that she look inward and ask not, "What do I want?" but, "What am I willing to give?" Standing at her side, though often grumbling about it, is the demigod, larger than life, endlessly boastful, but in this new chapter, carrying an undercurrent of vulnerability that was once carefully hidden beneath jokes and dazzling transformations. Time has weathered him, worn away some of the glittering surface to reveal the soul beneath. A being who once believed himself abandoned by both mortals and gods, now trying to find his place not as a lone force of nature, but as a partner, a protector, and perhaps most humbling of all, a friend. His arc is a quiet one, threaded through humor and bravado, but it is no less powerful. He must face the echoes of his past arrogance, the wounds left by choices made without understanding their ripple effects. It is one thing to save the world with a swing of a magical hook. It is another entirely to help heal it through patient, persistent effort. His journey in this story is about laying down the need to be the biggest, the best, the brightest, and instead becoming someone steady, dependable, and quietly extraordinary. Then there is the navigator, a new soul drawn into their orbit, whose reverence for the stars and the sea feels at first like an anchor, a reminder of the old ways. But beneath his calm exterior lies a heart deeply shaken by the shifting world around him. His ancestors read the constellations like poems. Now the stars seem to stutter and rearrange themselves without warning. His journey is one of faith, not in a higher power, but in the power of adaptation, of finding new meanings when the old ones fail. He struggles, doubts, falters, and yet he continues. Every adjustment to his course, every recalibration of his maps, becomes an act of quiet defiance against despair. Through him, the story honors the navigators of old, not as infallible sages, but as dreamers who dared to believe the ocean could be read, that paths could be carved through uncertainty simply by trusting in the unseen. The trickster spirit, ever shifting, ever elusive, brings a different energy to the ensemble. The voice recording sessions, too, carried their own strange magic. The returning actress who brought the chief to life spent time between sessions learning traditional Polynesian chants and lullabies, not for any scripted scene, but because she wanted her voice to carry the echoes of real ancestral memory. Some of those private warm-up sessions were recorded without her knowing and later used, raw and unpolished, during key emotional moments. Listening carefully, you can sometimes hear the trembling edge of unscripted feeling, the line between performance and truth blurring into something rare and real. The demigod's actor brought his own unpredictable energy to the recording booth, often improvising entire scenes based on instinct. One now iconic exchange during a pivotal storm sequence was born from a day when the actor, exhausted and punchy, riffed a sarcastic lullaby to mock the ferocity of the wind sound effects being blasted into his headphones. The directors loved the rough, chaotic humor of it so much they rewrote the scene to incorporate the spontaneous lines, giving a moment of levity that audiences now cite as one of the most human, relatable scenes in the entire film. And of course, there were the chickens. The animators couldn't resist hiding a few feathered Easter eggs throughout the movie, nods to the beloved, scatterbrained rooster of the first story. Blink during certain crowd scenes, and you might spot descendants of that original clucker, sometimes behaving suspiciously intelligently, sometimes not at all. It became a running joke among the crew. No matter how serious the scene, somewhere, a chicken was probably watching. One of the strangest, and most fiercely protected, secrets of the production was the real-life, living island that inspired the mystical heart of the story. An uninhabited landmass deep in the Pacific, so remote that even satellite images rarely captured it in full, served as the visual and emotional muse for the living island concept. The filmmakers, out of respect for its untouched status, never revealed its name publicly. Only a handful of production artists and writers ever set foot on its shores, under strict conditions to leave no trace. Some said the experience changed them permanently, that the island felt alive, not in the metaphoric sense, but in a way that defied easy explanation. During one scouting trip, a strange storm blew up around the tiny expedition, forcing them to shelter under gnarled trees as the sky turned an electric, otherworldly green. They spoke later of hearing songs on the wind, not words, but melodies that seemed woven into the very bones of the island. One artist's sketches from that night, hastily drawn by firelight, became the visual foundation for the island's shifting, breathing landscapes seen in the final film. Technical challenges also pushed the team into strange and wonderful territory. For sequences set within the mist, that unsettling, breathing barrier between the known and unknown, standard particle effects weren't enough. Instead, the visual effects team built physical mist machines on miniature sets, filming real tendrils of fog curling through handmade islands of moss and rock. These miniature plates were then blended digitally with animation, giving the mist an uncanny, almost sentient quality no computer could replicate. Even the soundtrack carried its share of peculiar secrets. Rather than rely solely on traditional instruments, the composers and sound designers crafted new ones. Water drums made from hollowed gourds, conch shells modified into horns, and strings wound from palm fibers were all recorded to capture sounds no modern orchestra could produce. In a particularly haunting sequence, the deep thrumming bass that underscores the ocean's anger was created by dragging massive driftwood logs across stone floors and layering the recordings until they sounded like the earth itself groaning. The production was not without its tributes, either. Hidden deep within one of the film's star fields, only visible for a few seconds, are constellation patterns that mirror the tattoos of the real Polynesian navigators, whose wisdom shaped so much of the film's spirit. It was a quiet homage, a way of acknowledging that their stars had lit the way long before any script had been written, and would continue to light the way long after. And perhaps the most touching detail of all, during the final weeks of production, a group of crew members, many of whom had spent years lost in the depths of this oceanic dream, gathered at the beach one sunset evening. They built canoes, not CGI, not miniature, but real, and set them adrift under the stars, carrying small paper offerings. Wishes, regrets, hopes. It wasn't filmed, wasn't staged. It was just a moment, shared among those who understood that in weaving stories about the sea, they had become part of the endless, flowing story themselves. Looking back, it's easy to see that the strangeness was never an accident. This was a story that demanded to be touched by real tides, real winds, real hands trembling under the weight of wonder. A story that understood that magic does not come from perfection, but from those moments when the world cracks open just enough to let a little wildness through. And somewhere out there, maybe even now, a new island breathes beneath the mist. A new song stirs beneath the waves. Waiting, listening, beckoning. In the soft glow of a rising sun over endless water, the story beckoned with promises of adventure and discovery. But beneath the shimmer of breathtaking visuals and the stirring call of ancient songs, something deeper stirred. A tapestry of moments woven so tightly with meaning that every scene, every decision, every heartbreak carried the weight of something larger than the plot itself. From the first frame to the last, this was a story that asked to be felt as much as understood, a film that did not simply tell a tale, but dared to whisper to the soul. From a critical perspective, few events stood out more than the decision to send the young chief away from her island once again, not as an act of rebellion or destiny, but as an act of stewardship. In most narratives, a sequel leans into repetition, another adventure, another quest. But here, the journey was framed through a new lens, responsibility. Critics noted that this decision redefined heroism not as a singular act of bravery, but as an ongoing, evolving promise to others. Leaving was not a selfish escape, it was a sacrifice, and the emotional cost of that choice resonated throughout the story like the deep, slow pulse of the ocean itself. Neither hero nor villain, it embodies the chaotic forces that resist easy categorization. Its motivations are as fluid as its form, its loyalties slippery. Yet even it, in the end, is shaped by the longing that drives every character in this story. The desire to belong, to matter, to be seen. For all its mischief and manipulation, the trickster is not immune to the pull of connection. It teaches, in its own roundabout way, that even the wildest, most unpredictable forces crave meaning. And then there is the living island, a character without a face or voice, but no less vital. It is the physical embodiment of the story's deepest themes: memory, wound, and renewal. It responds not to words or weapons, but to intent, to the songs of those who remember what it means to live in harmony rather than dominion. In its rage and sorrow, it mirrors the very real consequences of forgetting the bonds between land, sea, and people. Healing it requires more than mending the land. It demands mending the relationships broken by generations of neglect and arrogance. The dynamic between the young chief and her companions evolves with every trial they face. There are moments of friction, sharp words flung in exhaustion, mistrust simmering beneath the surface. But there are also moments of fierce loyalty, of laughter carved out of despair, of silent understanding passed with a glance. Together, they form a tapestry of flawed, aching, determined souls who have chosen, again and again, to keep moving forward even when every star seems to turn against them. Their struggles are not framed as personal failures, but as inevitable parts of the journey. Doubt is not weakness, it is a companion. Fear is not shameful, it is a reminder of what is at stake. By allowing each character to grapple openly with their uncertainties, the story crafts heroes who feel not like distant myths, but like echoes of ourselves, battered, hopeful, stubbornly reaching for the light. And perhaps most beautifully, the story refuses to grant any of them easy redemption. The demigod does not erase his past mistakes with a single act of bravery. He earns his redemption slowly, through small, consistent choices. The navigator does not reclaim certainty by rediscovering old maps. He learns to read new constellations, to chart unfamiliar courses. The trickster is not defeated or destroyed but integrated, recognized not as an enemy, but as part of the complex, chaotic dance of life. And the young chief does not end her journey by achieving some static, perfect ideal of leadership. She remains in motion, ever learning, ever adjusting, ever choosing. Her final triumph is not a victory over an external foe, but an acceptance of the endless, evolving responsibility she bears. To her people, to the ocean, to the delicate balance between dreaming and remembering. She understands that leadership is not a crown worn once and forever, but a sail hoisted into ever-changing winds, demanding new courage with each rising tide. In the end, every character stands not as an island, but as part of a vast, interconnected sea of stories. Old and new, broken and mended, sorrowful and hopeful. Their arcs remind us that true strength lies not in invulnerability, but in the willingness to remain open, to pain, to wonder, to change. That heroism is not about never falling, but about choosing to rise, again and again, even when the world offers no guarantees. And as the final credits roll across a sky painted with new constellations, we are left with the memory of them. The chief who chose to lead with love, the demigod who learned humility, the navigator who trusted in unseen paths, the trickster who found its place, and the island that, against all odds, remembered how to sing. Together, they remind us that the most powerful journeys are not those that end in triumph, but those that begin, again and again, with a single, stubborn, breathtaking act of hope. Behind every sweeping wave, every breathtaking sunset, and every whispered song that carried across the ocean in this story, there were dozens of hidden currents, strange little ripples and unseen storms that shaped the making of the journey as surely as any plot twist. The production itself became a voyage of discovery, filled with curious coincidences, happy accidents, and the kind of strange magic that no one could have planned, but everyone knew somehow was exactly right. From the very beginning, the making of the film was shadowed by an extraordinary coincidence. Just days after the earliest story meetings wrapped, real-world reports began to surface of unusual oceanic phenomena. Strange migrations, new islands emerging from volcanic activity, entire beaches reshaped overnight by the tides. The filmmakers joked, half seriously, that the ocean itself had started responding to the energy of the story. Writers and animators would sit in meetings swapping news articles, wide-eyed, marveling at how the themes they were weaving into fiction were beginning to echo faintly in the waking world. Perhaps it was fate. Or perhaps, as one producer liked to say with a grin, the ocean has always known how to listen better than humans give it credit for. One of the most fascinating aspects of the film's production was the technology developed to capture the movement of water. A task that, though it sounds simple, remains one of the most notoriously difficult effects to create authentically. The team built entirely new simulation models, using real-world data from oceanographers and fluid dynamicists. They didn't just want water that looked real, they wanted water that felt alive. Tiny currents, subsurface reflections, the way foam breaks and reforms. Everything was studied down to the most obsessive degree. And yet, in an unexpected twist, some of the most convincing water effects didn't come from computers at all. At a crucial point in the production, an animator accidentally submitted a test clip that included hand-painted texture overlays, quick, rough sketches layered onto the digital model as placeholders. Instead of rejecting it, the directors fell in love with the organic, slightly imperfect quality it gave the scene. From that point on, they leaned into this strange hybrid style, blending cutting-edge simulation with old-school artistry. The result was a living, breathing ocean that didn't just mimic nature, it honored it. Then there was the story of the singing rocks. While scouting locations and inspirations in the Pacific, a sound designer recorded a phenomenon off a remote coastline. Rocks that, when struck by waves at just the right angle, emitted soft, melodic tones. The recordings were so eerie and beautiful that they became the foundation for much of the ambient soundscape in the film's mist-shrouded island sequences. In a sense, the rocks themselves became part of the cast, their voices stitched into the film's very bones. The moment when the islandess gathered under the stars to hear the young chief declare her intent was quietly revolutionary. No grand battle, no dramatic rebellion, just a woman standing before her people, trusting them to understand the necessity of her journey. It was a scene soaked in love, vulnerability, and mutual respect, and it marked a significant thematic shift. Leadership here was not about dominance or command. It was about service. Critics praised this depiction as a refreshing break from the trope of the lone hero, highlighting instead the communal nature of true leadership. The journey into the mist, that eerie, breathing void beyond the known world, was another moment where surface spectacle disguised profound symbolic weight. In those moments, the mist became a character in its own right, the embodiment of uncertainty, fear, and the unknown future. Each step forward was a defiance of paralysis, a commitment to act even when clarity was impossible. This sequence, haunting and strange, earned critical acclaim not just for its stunning animation, but for how it captured the essence of change itself. That terrifying, beautiful moment when the old maps no longer suffice, and you must navigate by instinct and trust alone. When they reached the living island, critics recognized immediately that this was no simple antagonist to be defeated. Instead, the island's suffering revealed a more nuanced villainy. Not an evil being, but a broken world. This shift moved the story beyond simple battles of good versus evil into a richer, more ambiguous space where healing, not victory, became the ultimate goal. This decision drew praise for its maturity, for its willingness to embrace complexity in a genre that often favors simplicity. Healing required acknowledgement of past mistakes, humility, and a willingness to change. Not flashy heroics, but quiet, grueling work. Another moment that drew intense critical focus was the confrontation with the trickster. This entity, neither fully malicious nor benevolent, served as a mirror, reflecting the crew's doubts, fears, and deepest flaws. Rather than defeating it through strength, the protagonists prevailed by choosing empathy and understanding. Critics highlighted this as one of the film's most daring moves, to suggest that redemption and reconciliation are possible even for forces that seem chaotic and threatening. It was a message that felt urgent and resonant in a world grappling with divisions and distrust. Of course, not every critic agreed on every choice. Some argued that the film's slower pacing, particularly in its mist-shrouded middle act, risked losing younger audiences raised on relentless action. But even among dissenters, there was a grudging respect for the filmmaker's commitment to letting the story breathe, to allowing space for introspection and emotional complexity. It was a film that trusted its audience to sit with uncertainty, to embrace discomfort, and for many, that trust was deeply rewarding. One of the film's most universally praised moments was the elemental confrontation near the climax. As the ocean turned violent, rejecting its former ally, the imagery struck with a visceral, almost mythic power. Here, the protagonist faced not an external foe, but the betrayal of something she had always trusted. It was a metaphor, critics observed, for every moment when the systems we rely on, nature, tradition, community, seem to turn against us because we have forgotten to nurture and respect them. Her decision to respond not with anger or domination, but with humility and song, was hailed as a radical act of hope. In choosing to believe in the possibility of restoration rather than conquest, she became a different kind of hero, one who wins not by breaking her enemies, but by healing the broken world itself. It was a choice that rippled outward, touching every character and every strand of the narrative, transforming what could have been a standard victory into something luminous and unforgettable. Critics also praised the narrative's treatment of legacy and memory. The living island was not merely a plot device. It was a living embodiment of the consequences of forgetting. Through its sorrow and rage, the film confronted uncomfortable truths about humanity's relationship with nature, history, and each other. The message was clear and unflinching. When we neglect the bonds that sustain us, to land, to ocean, to community, we invite collapse. But even in collapse, the story whispered, there is the potential for renewal, if we are brave enough to remember, to atone, to rebuild. The emotional resonance of these themes was amplified by the film's visual and auditory storytelling. Reviewers marveled at how the music, sound design, and animation worked in perfect harmony to convey emotional truths beyond words. In the quiet moments, a hand brushing against ancient stone, a tear slipping into the sea, the film found its greatest power. These were not merely narrative beats. They were emotional spells, cast carefully and lovingly to awaken something deep within the viewer. Audience reactions mirrored the critical praise. Viewers spoke of feeling seen, understood, challenged. Many shared stories of their own struggles with change, with leadership, with grief and hope. The film's refusal to offer easy solutions resonated deeply, offering instead a bittersweet, profoundly human understanding of what it means to move forward when the world itself seems uncertain. In the end, what emerged most clearly from critical analysis was this. The film was not content to be a mere continuation, a retread of past glories. It sought, with quiet boldness, to tell a story about what happens after the happy ending. When the journey continues, when the challenges deepen, when the true work of living and leading begins. It dared to say that the end of one adventure is only the beginning of another, and that the choices we make, to listen, to heal, to hope, matter, even when they are small and unseen. It was, critics agreed, a story for a world desperately in need of gentler heroes. For a world that needed to be reminded that true strength lies not in domination, but in care. That real victory is not about standing tallest, but about reaching back, offering a hand, and pulling others up beside you. That the ocean's call is not just a summons to adventure, but an invitation to stewardship, a reminder that the story of our world is still being written, and that every one of us has a part to play. In the echoing silence after the last song faded, in the shimmer of light across the closing waves, the film left behind a gift more precious than any treasure, a renewed faith in the enduring, stubborn magic of hope, and the understanding that even in the face of rising tides and darkened skies, it is never too late to listen, to remember, and to choose, again and again, to sail toward a better horizon. The making of this story, this sweeping voyage across an ancient, restless ocean, was itself a journey as vast and unpredictable as the one its characters undertook. Long before the first shimmering wave rolled across the screen, before a single note of music rose into the air, there were rooms filled with sketches, hearts filled with half-formed dreams, and a team of artists, animators, and storytellers ready to chase something as wild and elusive as the ocean itself. It all began with a question whispered among the original creative team. What happens after you've saved your world? That seed grew roots quickly. The story they wanted to tell wasn't just about setting sail again. It was about the deeper tides that pull at those who carry the weight of a people's future. Early brainstorming sessions became voyages of their own, full of debates about responsibility, tradition, change, and the tension between honoring the past and daring to imagine something new. And so the team committed themselves to a different kind of sequel, one that would feel both inevitable and surprising, one that would honor everything that came before while refusing to be bound by it. The research trips were the first step. Once again, the filmmakers traveled to the Pacific Islands, not merely as tourists, but as students. They spent weeks living among communities where the connection between land, sea, and people remained vital and sacred. They listened to elders speak of tides and spirits, of journeys undertaken not to conquer, but to belong. Every word, every story, became a thread woven into the new tapestry they were creating. During one memorable visit, a chief shared an ancient story about an island that moved, a place that breathed and shifted, sometimes appearing and sometimes vanishing beneath the sea. This myth captivated the team and became the seed for the living island that would lie at the heart of the new journey. It was a reminder that even the land itself is alive, a truth forgotten by so many modern myths. Back at the studio, the challenge was to breathe life into this ancient magic without losing the wildness that made it sacred. The ocean, a character in its own right, presented the first major hurdle. Although the previous story had already set a high bar for animated water, the team was determined to push further. They created entirely new water simulation software, allowing the ocean to behave not just as a physical force, but as an emotional presence. Animators described the process as sculpting with feelings, crafting waves that could express sorrow, joy, anger, and hope without a single word spoken. And yet, despite all the technical innovations, the team found that the most powerful scenes often came from simpler, handcrafted techniques. One animator, inspired by Polynesian tattooing traditions, suggested layering hand-drawn textures over the digital water models. These subtle, almost imperceptible details gave the ocean an organic, breathing quality that no algorithm could replicate. It was a marriage of old and new, a fitting echo of the story's central theme. As the visual world expanded, so too did the soundscape. The musical team, including returning composers and fresh collaborators, ventured into uncharted territory. They spent days recording the sounds of real oceans, not just the familiar crash of waves, but the quiet, rhythmic thrum of deep water, the whisper of currents threading through coral, the far-off songs of whales. Some sessions took place underwater, using specially designed microphones to capture the music hidden beneath the surface. The score itself wove traditional Polynesian instruments, log drums, conch shells, nose flutes, with modern orchestral elements. Composers spoke of wanting the music to feel like a tide, at times gently pulling the audience forward, at times crashing over them with overwhelming force. They even experimented with silence, letting the absence of sound carry as much emotional weight as the grandest crescendos. Casting and voice work brought its own share of surprises and joy. The young chief's actress returned to her role with a deeper understanding of her character's journey, infusing each line with the wisdom and weariness of someone who had truly grown. Between takes, she often improvised quiet songs, lullabies she had learned during research trips. Many of these impromptu pieces were recorded and later layered into the film's background, creating a ghostly echo of memory that audiences might not consciously notice, but would feel. The demigod's actor, ever the source of humor and heart, improvised so many lines during recording that entire scenes were rewritten to better match his spontaneous energy. One now iconic moment, a song teasing the chief about her serious face during a particularly tense storm, was entirely unscripted, born from a real bout of laughter between takes. New characters brought fresh life and unexpected depth to the ensemble. The navigator, a quiet, steadfast presence, was voiced by an actor who insisted on learning traditional wayfinding techniques as part of his preparation. He spent weeks studying star maps, memorizing the positions of constellations, and learning how to read the language of ocean swells. His dedication brought an authenticity to his performance that resonated through every word, every hesitant decision, every moment of regained faith. And then there was the trickster. Finding the right voice for this shape-shifting, mischievous spirit took longer than any other casting decision. Dozens of auditions came and went before the directors stumbled upon a performer, little known but wildly talented, whose voice seemed to slip and shimmer between tones with effortless grace. Their portrayal balanced humor and menace in a way that elevated the trickster from mere comic relief to something strange and unforgettable. Production was not without its challenges. The living island, with its constantly shifting landscapes, broke every pipeline the animators had. Scenes had to be re-rendered dozens of times to capture the breathing, moving nature of the land itself. One particularly complex shot, a river that wound itself into spirals as it sang, required a team of 20 artists working non-stop for nearly 2 months. Weather, too, seemed determined to weave itself into the film's destiny. Several key members of the production team recalled strange weather patterns coinciding with important milestones. A freak storm on the day the final storyboards were approved, a sudden clearing of clouds during a pivotal outdoor recording session. Some laughed it off as coincidence. Others, more quietly, wondered if perhaps the ocean was listening and offering its own blessing or warning. One of the most touching behind-the-scenes traditions began during the first week of full animation production. Each morning, the team would gather for a few moments of silence before work began. Not a formal meeting, not a pep talk, but a quiet reflection. Sometimes a crew member would share a memory of the ocean, or a story passed down from a grandparent. Other times, they simply stood together, breathing in the shared weight of the story they were trying to tell. These moments became sacred, a daily reminder that they were not just making a movie, but tending a living story, one that belonged to something much larger than themselves. Hidden throughout the final film are small tributes to the people and cultures who made it possible. A mural glimpsed on a crumbling island wall carries the names of real navigators whose wisdom shaped the journey. A lullaby sung in the background of a marketplace scene includes verses recorded by children from Pacific Island communities who had been invited to share their voices with the world. Even the constellations in the night sky were carefully mapped to mirror real star paths, ensuring that those who knew how to read them would find secret messages written among the stars. And perhaps the most beautiful detail of all, the closing credits. Instead of listing cast and crew in the usual way, the filmmakers chose to list everyone, from lead animators to catering staff, alphabetically, side by side. A small gesture, perhaps, but one that echoed the film's deeper message. That every person, no matter how seemingly small their role, is part of the great, endless story of creation. In the end, the making of this story became a voyage in its own right. A journey into memory, into dreams, into the wild, breathing heart of the world itself. And when the final frame flickered to life on the screen, when the last note of the ocean's song faded into the darkness, those who had crafted it could feel, deep down, that they had not just built a story. They had answered a call. They had sailed into the unknown. And in doing so, they had reminded the world that somewhere, just beyond the horizon, wonder still waits. Before a single character speaks, before a song rises into the salt-heavy air, before even the first stirring notes of the ocean's ancient song reach the audience's ears, the world of the story speaks for itself. It speaks through light and shadow, through the tilt of a wave and the whisper of mist curling over unseen shores. In this film, the setting is not simply a backdrop. It is the silent, living pulse of the story, as vital and expressive as any character who strides across the screen. It begins, fittingly, with the ocean. Not the placid blue postcard of travel brochures, but an ancient, changeable being. The ocean here is a character unto itself, shifting from gentle cradle to fierce adversary, from mirror to mystery. The filmmakers approached it not as a singular entity, but as a symphony of moods and personalities. Each stretch of water was designed to tell its own part of the story. Shallow lagoons shimmer with warmth and safety, their turquoise surfaces flickering like laughter. Deeper waters churn in endless, restless motion, the colors darkening into ominous shades of indigo and black. Storm-tossed seas howl and snap with a violence that makes every frame hum with tension. To capture this ever-changing relationship with the sea, the cinematography leaned heavily into perspective shifts. When the young chief felt confident and at one with the ocean, the camera floated serenely above her, soaring alongside the rise and fall of her canoe. But in moments of doubt or danger, the viewpoint shifted, lower, closer to the churning water, making the audience feel small and vulnerable against the endless power of the sea. It was a subtle but masterful way of making the viewer experience the ocean's moods alongside the characters, not just witnessing them, but feeling them under their skin. Beyond the waves lay the islands, each one a carefully crafted reflection of the story's emotional beats. The home island, familiar and beloved, glowed with rich, earthy tones. Sunlight slanted through groves of breadfruit and palm, casting dappled patterns that felt as warm and tangible as memory itself. Villages were built with care and history in mind, their architecture blending seamlessly into the surrounding landscape, telling the unspoken story of generations that had lived and loved and died in tune with the rhythms of the sea. But as the journey carried the crew farther from the known world, the settings grew stranger, more dreamlike. Islands rose like sentinels from the mist, their shapes shifting depending on the angle of the light. Cliffs jutted at impossible angles, trees twisted into unnatural shapes, their roots clutching at stone as if trying to anchor themselves against some invisible current. These places were not meant to feel safe or welcoming. They were designed to unsettle, to remind both characters and audience alike that they were sailing into the unknown, a realm where the old maps no longer applied, and the only guide was courage. The mist itself became a setting of sorts, a living, breathing entity that cloaked the final leg of their voyage. It was rendered not with simple fog effects, but with layers upon layers of swirling particles and soft glows, creating a sensation of depthless space. The cinematography leaned into close, claustrophobic shots, letting the mist swallow up the edges of the frame, blurring the line between sea and sky, dream and reality. Sound design complemented this perfectly. Ambient noises, creaking wood, distant whale calls, the almost silent lap of unseen waves, were muffled, as if the characters were moving through some vast, underwater cathedral. And then there was the living island, the heart of the mystery, the broken soul that had to be healed. Its design was a marvel of contrasts, beauty and decay interwoven so tightly that neither could exist without the other. Bioluminescent plants pulsed with sickly light. Rivers that once ran clear now carried shimmering, unsettling colors. Vast cliffs bore ancient carvings, half eroded into illegibility, standing as silent witnesses to a forgotten pact. Every element of the island's design reinforced the emotional truth of the story, that what was once whole had been fractured, but that even broken things could be beautiful, and even dying things could be healed. Lighting played a crucial role in shaping the island's mood. Early scenes on the island bathed everything in an eerie twilight, neither day nor night, a visual manifestation of its liminal, wounded state. As the protagonists worked to heal the land, subtle shifts in the lighting occurred. Warm golds and vibrant greens slowly seeped back into the palette, often so gradually that audiences might not consciously notice, but their hearts would feel the change. By the film's end, the island did not return to its former perfection. It wore its scars openly, but it pulsed with life once more, its colors richer and deeper for the struggles endured. Throughout the film, cinematographers used movement as emotional language. Long, sweeping shots accompanied moments of hope and unity, allowing the audience to breathe alongside the characters. In contrast, quick, jarring cuts dominated scenes of fear or conflict, creating a disjointed, panicked rhythm that mirrored the characters' internal turmoil. Water, wind, and sky were not static elements but collaborators in the storytelling, each shift in their behavior underscoring the emotional stakes. Small details added layers of meaning to every location.
On the home island, murals depicted the great voyages of the ancestors, not just as historical record, but as living reminders of the choices and sacrifices that had shaped their world. On the living island, broken carvings showed once thriving ecosystems now faded into ghostly outlines. In the mist, strange constellations winked in and out of existence, hints that the natural order was fraying at the edges. Every detail, no matter how fleeting, was intentional, designed to root the viewer deeper into the emotional soil of the story. Color grading, often an invisible art, became a storytelling tool in itself. The early scenes basked in warm, sun-drenched hues, evoking a sense of belonging and memory. As the journey progressed, the palette cooled, blues and grays creeping in, stealing warmth from the frame. Only when the final choices were made, when reconciliation triumphed over fear, did color return in full force, not as a restoration of the past, but as the birth of something new and hard-won. Sound design and visual effects worked in harmony to give the world a tactile sense of being alive. Waves murmured with hidden voices. Trees creaked not just with wind, but with longing. Even silence had texture, the soft, aching silence of mist-thick air, of waiting waters. Every environment breathed, sighed, and sang, reinforcing the core truth that nature in this world was not backdrop but character, with hopes, griefs, and needs of its own. In the final scenes, as the canoe slipped back toward the home island, the cinematography shifted once again. The camera pulled back, lifting higher into the sky, showing the tiny boat against the vast, endless ocean. But this time, the scale was not meant to intimidate or diminish. It was a quiet affirmation that smallness does not mean insignificance, that even the smallest hand, reaching across the water, can change the tides. Ultimately, the settings and cinematic elements did more than create a beautiful world. They reinforced the film's deepest messages, that leadership is a living act, that memory and change are intertwined, and that healing is not about returning to the past, but about daring to step forward with open eyes and an open heart. Every wave, every shadow, every breath of mist was a reminder that the world is alive, and that it remembers. In crafting a world so rich, so raw, and so fiercely alive, the filmmakers honored the oldest truth of storytelling, that the land, the sea, and the sky are not just places we move through, but partners in our journey. And in doing so, they created not just a setting, but a world that lingers long after the final credits fade, a world that feels, impossibly, like home. Behind every sweeping shot of endless oceans, every pulse of misty, living islands, and every heartbeat of this story's emotional journey, there lies another story, a quieter, messier, and often much funnier one. The making of this film was not merely a mechanical operation, not a series of cold decisions executed on computers. It was a living thing, as wild and unpredictable as the ocean it portrayed, full of unexpected challenges, surprising friendships, and moments where magic leapt out of nowhere and demanded to be captured. It all began, as so many stories do, with a reunion. Many members of the original team returned, older and a little wiser, carrying with them the memories of the first voyage. The energy in those early production meetings was electric, a mixture of excitement and terror. They weren't just making another film. They were stepping back into a world that had become deeply personal, beloved by audiences around the world. The stakes were enormous, not because of box office expectations, but because of the emotional legacy they all felt so fiercely determined to honor. One of the first fun traditions to spark was a daily ocean huddle. Every morning, before any work began, the team would gather in a large open space decorated with hanging seashells, driftwood sculptures, and hand-woven mats. Someone, an animator, a producer, even the janitorial staff, would share a memory of the sea, a childhood fishing trip, a story told by a grandparent, a fear of deep water overcome. It wasn't just a bonding exercise. It was a way of grounding the fantastical work they were about to do in real, human experience. As work ramped up, it quickly became clear that the ocean itself would be their greatest ally and their most fickle collaborator. During research trips to various Pacific islands, the crew faced everything from sudden monsoon rains to unexpected shark sightings during underwater recordings. In one now-famous incident, a sound engineer trying to capture the noise of water flowing through volcanic rock formations accidentally dropped a $10,000 microphone into the sea. The team held an impromptu diving expedition and, against all odds, recovered it 2 hours later, still working, and now lovingly nicknamed Lucky Mike. Back in the studio, the challenges were no less unpredictable. Animating a living, breathing island pushed technology to its limits. Early versions of the island sequences crashed servers so frequently that the IT department started a running bet on how many hours each render would survive before imploding. To deal with the frustration, the animators created island mood boards, posters covered in memes, jokes, and doodles expressing the island's emotions for the day. Some days it was a grumpy toddler refusing to nap. Other days it was a lonely giant aching for company. The cast, meanwhile, became a family in their own right. Recording sessions were often scheduled in clusters, bringing several actors together whenever possible, a break from the typical isolation of voice work. These joint sessions led to an extraordinary chemistry, full of spontaneous moments that made their way into the final film. It wasn't unusual for an emotional scene to be interrupted by uncontrollable laughter when someone flubbed a line or ad-libbed a ridiculous aside. In fact, one of the film's most heartfelt exchanges, an unscripted apology between the demigod and the young chief, grew out of such a moment when the actress, overcome by the weight of the scene, stumbled through her lines, leading to a raw, genuine response from her co-star. The demigod's actor, well known for his improvisational genius, delighted in sneaking in jokes during serious scenes. At one point, while recording a moment of deep regret, he slipped in an offhand comment about his character's bad hair decade that had the entire booth in stitches. The directors loved it so much they wove it into the final cut, a tiny shard of humor that grounded the grandeur in relatable human foibles. But not every challenge was met with laughter. There were days when the weight of expectation bore down heavily on the team. When rendering failures cost weeks of work. When story meetings ended with heads bowed in exhaustion, wondering if they had lost their way. In those moments, the daily ocean huddles became more than tradition, they became lifelines. Sharing stories, frustrations, and small victories reminded everyone that they weren't sailing alone, that the work they were doing mattered, even if it sometimes felt like they were adrift. One of the most poignant behind-the-scenes moments came during the recording of a key song. The young chief's actress, tasked with singing a lullaby meant to bridge the past and the future, struggled to find the right emotional tone. After hours of takes that felt flat, the musical director gently suggested she take a break and think of her own family, of promises made, of hopes carried across generations. When she returned, voice trembling, she delivered a version so raw and real that the entire room fell silent, many with tears in their eyes. That take, imperfect and beautiful, became the version used in the final film. Another unforgettable day involved a surprise visit from Polynesian navigators who had been consulting on the project. They arrived at the studio in traditional dress, bearing gifts, songs, blessings, and carved tools used by their ancestors. They spoke of wayfinding, of reading the stars and the waves, and of the deep, sacred connection between humans and the sea. Their words became a kind of unofficial mantra for the crew. You do not conquer the ocean. You learn to listen to it. Filming animatics, early rough versions of scenes, often led to unexpected comedy. Storyboard artists, tasked with voicing temporary dialogue, sometimes took creative liberties that became running jokes among the crew. The living island, for instance, was affectionately nicknamed Big Moni, after a particularly whiny placeholder voice track. Shirts were printed. Mugs were made. For weeks, you couldn't walk into the production offices without hearing someone groaning in an exaggerated island voice whenever a render crashed. But perhaps the most extraordinary behind-the-scenes story came during a late-night session when a small team was finalizing the pivotal scene where the ocean reveals its true pain. Exhausted and running on caffeine and stubbornness, they struggled to find the right visual rhythm. The scene refused to click. Out of desperation, they dimmed the studio lights, projected the rough cut onto a wall, and lay flat on the floor, staring up at it as if gazing at the stars. Something shifted in that upside-down viewing. They saw the currents move differently, felt the weight of sorrow and hope coiling through the water. They reworked the scene on the spot, and it became one of the film's emotional high points. Throughout it all, the bond among the cast and crew only deepened. They celebrated every milestone not with big parties, but with small, heartfelt rituals. Sunset beach walks, handwritten notes slipped into each other's lockers, spontaneous jam sessions in the recording studio. They understood that they weren't just making a movie. They were weaving a story that would, if they did it right, become part of people's lives, part of the vast, endless ocean of memory and dream. By the time the final render was completed, the film didn't just belong to the studio, or the directors, or the cast. It belonged to everyone who had dared to dream of a living ocean. Everyone who had stayed up through endless nights chasing the shimmer of an idea. Everyone who had sung to the stars, trusting that the currents would carry them home. And so, behind the breathtaking vistas, the stirring songs, and the fierce, tender characters, there is another story. A story of laughter in the face of frustration, of friendships forged under impossible deadlines, of small moments of wonder snatched between deadlines and deliverables. A story of a crew who, in answering the call of a fictional ocean, discovered new oceans within themselves. And who, in doing so, created something that will call out across the waves to anyone willing to listen. From the very first frame, when the sun kisses the rolling waves and the horizon stretches wide and unknowable, it becomes clear that this story is about more than adventure. Beneath the glittering surface of its sweeping ocean vistas and mythical encounters, a deeper current runs, a current made of memory, of responsibility, of reckoning. Every choice made by the characters, every twist in the journey, every shift in the restless sea, pulses with meaning. The themes and symbols are woven so intricately into the tapestry of the story that to understand them is to hear the song beneath the waves, the melody that binds the world together. At the heart of everything is the theme of stewardship. Not just leadership, not just exploration, but stewardship, the ongoing, living responsibility to care for what has been entrusted to you. For the young chief, stepping into her role was never about claiming power. It was about carrying forward a legacy, about nurturing a fragile balance between people, land, and sea. Her journey is not framed by conquest or triumph, but by caretaking, by the willingness to listen even when the answers are unclear, and to act even when certainty is impossible. The ocean itself symbolizes this delicate balance. It is neither hero nor villain, but a living embodiment of the world's memory and mood. When it nurtures, it is because it has been honored. When it rages, it is because it has been wounded. The ocean's shifting behavior mirrors the core truth of stewardship. that the natural world is not static, not something to be dominated or controlled, but a living partner in humanity's story, deserving of reverence and reciprocity. Closely tied to stewardship is the theme of memory and forgetting. The living island, breathing, wounded, shifting, serves as a potent symbol of this idea. It is the forgotten pact made manifest, the physical consequence of promises broken and songs silenced. In allowing the land to be wounded, the ancestors had not simply failed themselves, they had failed the generations to come. The island's sorrow is the sorrow of every place left untended, every history erased, every bond taken for granted. The character's journey into the mist, that strange breathing void where even the stars seem to twist away from their paths, symbolizes the terrifying, necessary confrontation with the unknown that must occur when old certainties fail. The mist is not just an obstacle, it is the space where transformation becomes possible. It is the death of naivety, the death of inherited assumptions. To pass through it requires faith, not blind faith in tradition, but living faith in one's ability to adapt, to listen, to weave new paths from broken threads. Another profound theme woven through the narrative is that of reconciliation. The conflict is never truly between people and monsters, heroes and villains. It is between memory and amnesia, between care and neglect. Healing the world is not about defeating an enemy. It is about acknowledging harm, seeking understanding, and choosing, again and again, to repair what has been broken. In the final confrontation, when the young chief faces not a tyrant but a wounded spirit, her choice to sing, to offer connection rather than control, encapsulates the film's moral core, that redemption is possible, but only through humility and effort. This idea extends to the relationships among the crew. The demigod, once a symbol of unchecked ego and selfishness, undergoes his own journey of reconciliation, not through grand gestures, but through steady, unglamorous acts of loyalty and vulnerability. His arc mirrors the greater story, acknowledgement of past wrongs, a choice to change, a willingness to rebuild trust brick by brick, moment by moment. The navigator's struggle with the stars, once fixed guides, now unreliable, reflects another crucial theme, the tension between tradition and innovation. In a world where the old maps no longer lead safely home, the characters must learn to navigate by instinct, by heart. It is a powerful metaphor for the challenge facing every generation. How to honor the wisdom of the past without becoming shackled by it, how to forge new ways forward when the paths once deemed sacred falter. The trickster spirit embodies the chaos inherent in change. Neither good nor evil, it thrives in the spaces between, in uncertainty and flux. It serves as both antagonist and teacher, forcing the characters to confront not external threats but internal doubts. By refusing to destroy the trickster, by choosing to integrate and understand it, the story acknowledges that chaos, too, has its place. That growth often requires disruption, that renewal is born not from perfect preservation, but from the messy, painful, necessary work of transformation. The use of light and color throughout the film further deepens the thematic resonance. The home island's warm, vibrant palette symbolizes harmony, connection, and rootedness. The cool, unsettling tones of the mist signal the disorientation of facing a world where old certainties collapse. The shifting bioluminescent hues of the living island reflect the tension between decay and vitality, between death and rebirth. These visual cues are not mere decoration. They are emotional signposts, guiding the audience through the characters' internal landscapes. Songs, too, are laden with symbolic meaning. Each melody carries echoes of ancestry, promises made and forgotten. Singing becomes an act of remembering, of reaffirming connection not just to the past, but to the future. When the young chief sings to the island, she is not merely soothing it. She is weaving herself into the great, endless tapestry of memory, choosing to be a bearer of tradition and a beacon for what comes next. Even small symbolic moments enrich the story's thematic depth. The planting of trees, the mending of broken carvings, the simple act of sharing stories around a fire. These are not grand gestures, but they carry enormous weight. They remind us that healing is not achieved through spectacle, but through countless small acts of care. That the work of stewardship is slow, ongoing, often invisible, but utterly vital. Ultimately, the film's most profound theme is hope. Not naive, easy hope, but the stubborn, aching, hard-won hope that persists even when the storms rage and the path vanishes into mist. The kind of hope that chooses to believe in renewal even when the old songs are broken. That trusts in the possibility of healing even when the wounds seem too deep. It is this hope that allows the characters and the audience to move forward. To understand that the ocean's call is not just a summons to adventure, but an invitation to care. To believe that even in a world wounded by forgetting, memory can be rekindled. To trust that even when the stars go dark, the heart can find a way. In the end, every wave, every whisper of mist, every shard of broken island sings the same song. That stewardship, memory, reconciliation, and hope are not abstract ideals, but living choices. Choices made in every act of listening, every word of kindness, every moment of courage. And that through these choices, the ocean endures. The land heals. The stars reappear. And the story, the great, endless, ever-changing story, sails onward into the waiting dawn. From the very first frame, when the sun kisses the rolling waves and the horizon stretches wide and unknowable, it becomes clear that this story is about more than adventure. Beneath the glittering surface of its sweeping ocean vistas and mythical encounters, a deeper current runs, a current made of memory, of responsibility, of reckoning. Every choice made by the characters, every twist in the journey, every shift in the restless sea, pulses with meaning. The themes and symbols are woven so intricately into the tapestry of the story that to understand them is to hear the song beneath the waves, the melody that binds the world together. At the heart of everything is the theme of stewardship. Not just leadership, not just exploration, but stewardship, the ongoing, living responsibility to care for what has been entrusted to you. For the young chief, stepping into her role was never about claiming power. It was about carrying forward a legacy, about nurturing a fragile balance between people, land, and sea. Her journey is not framed by conquest or triumph, but by caretaking, by the willingness to listen even when the answers are unclear, and to act even when certainty is impossible. The ocean itself symbolizes this delicate balance. It is neither hero nor villain, but a living embodiment of the world's memory and mood. When it nurtures, it is because it has been honored. When it rages, it is because it has been wounded. The ocean's shifting behavior mirrors the core truth of stewardship, that the natural world is not static, not something to be dominated or controlled, but a living partner in humanity's story, deserving of reverence and reciprocity. Closely tied to stewardship is the theme of memory and forgetting. The living island, breathing, wounded, shifting, serves as a potent symbol of this idea. It is the forgotten pact made manifest, the physical consequence of promises broken and songs silenced. In allowing the land to be wounded, the ancestors had not simply failed themselves, they had failed the generations to come. The island's sorrow is the sorrow of every place left untended, every history erased, every bond taken for granted. The character's journey into the mist, that strange breathing void where even the stars seem to twist away from their paths, symbolizes the terrifying, necessary confrontation with the unknown that must occur when old certainties fail. The mist is not just an obstacle, it is the space where transformation becomes possible. It is the death of naivety, the death of inherited assumptions. To pass through it requires faith, not blind faith in tradition, but living faith in one's ability to adapt, to listen, to weave new paths from broken threads. Another profound theme woven through the narrative is that of reconciliation. The conflict is never truly between people and monsters, heroes and villains. It is between memory and amnesia, between care and neglect. Healing the world is not about defeating an enemy. It is about acknowledging harm, seeking understanding, and choosing, again and again, to repair what has been broken. In the final confrontation, when the young chief faces not a tyrant but a wounded spirit, her choice to sing, to offer connection rather than control, encapsulates the film's moral core, that redemption is possible, but only through humility and effort. This idea extends to the relationships among the crew. The demigod, once a symbol of unchecked ego and selfishness, undergoes his own journey of reconciliation, not through grand gestures, but through steady, unglamorous acts of loyalty and vulnerability. His arc mirrors the greater story: acknowledgement of past wrongs, a choice to change, a willingness to rebuild trust brick by brick, moment by moment. The navigator's struggle with the stars, once fixed guides, now unreliable, reflects another crucial theme: the tension between tradition and innovation. In a world where the old maps no longer lead safely home, the characters must learn to navigate by instinct, by heart. It is a powerful metaphor for the challenge facing every generation: how to honor the wisdom of the past without becoming shackled by it, how to forge new ways forward when the paths once deemed sacred falter. The trickster spirit embodies the chaos inherent in change. Neither good nor evil, it thrives in the spaces between, in uncertainty and flux. It serves as both antagonist and teacher, forcing the characters to confront not external threats but internal doubts. By refusing to destroy the trickster, by choosing to integrate and understand it, the story acknowledges that chaos, too, has its place. That growth often requires disruption, that renewal is born not from perfect preservation, but from the messy, painful, necessary work of transformation. The use of light and color throughout the film further deepens the thematic resonance. The home island's warm, vibrant palette symbolizes harmony, connection, and rootedness. The cool, unsettling tones of the mist signal the disorientation of facing a world where old certainties collapse. The shifting bioluminescent hues of the living island reflect the tension between decay and vitality, between death and rebirth. These visual cues are not mere decoration. They are emotional signposts, guiding the audience through the characters' internal landscapes. Songs, too, are laden with symbolic meaning. Each melody carries echoes of ancestry, promises made and forgotten. Singing becomes an act of remembering, of reaffirming connection not just to the past, but to the future. When the young chief sings to the island, she is not merely soothing it. She is weaving herself into the great, endless tapestry of memory, choosing to be a bearer of tradition and a beacon for what comes next. Even small symbolic moments enrich the story's thematic depth. The planting of trees, the mending of broken carvings, the simple act of sharing stories around a fire. These are not grand gestures, but they carry enormous weight. They remind us that healing is not achieved through spectacle, but through countless small acts of care. That the work of stewardship is slow, ongoing, often invisible, but utterly vital. Ultimately, the film's most profound theme is hope. Not naive, easy hope, but the stubborn, aching, hard-won hope that persists even when the storms rage and the path vanishes into mist. The kind of hope that chooses to believe in renewal even when the old songs are broken. That trusts in the possibility of healing even when the wounds seem too deep. It is this hope that allows the characters and the audience to move forward. To understand that the ocean's call is not just a summons to adventure, but an invitation to care. To believe that even in a world wounded by forgetting, memory can be rekindled. To trust that even when the stars go dark, the heart can find a way. In the end, every wave, every whisper of mist, every shard of broken island sings the same song: that stewardship, memory, reconciliation, and hope are not abstract ideals, but living choices. Choices made in every act of listening, every word of kindness, every moment of courage. And that through these choices, the ocean endures. The land heals. The stars reappear. And the story, the great, endless, ever-changing story, sails onward into the waiting dawn. Long before the ocean glimmered beneath a rising sun, before the first haunting notes of a lullaby floated on the wind, the architects of this story gathered with one monumental challenge: to make magic that could be felt in the bones. The filmmaking techniques behind the journey were not just technical achievements. They were emotional scaffolds, built carefully to hold the weight of memory, wonder, and heartbreak. Every choice, from the brush of light across a character's face to the thrum of a distant drumbeat beneath the ocean's surface, was made with one sacred goal: to make the audience feel as if they were stepping into a living, breathing world. From the beginning, the directors knew that authenticity would be their anchor. The water, the land, the skies, they couldn't be beautiful in the way of postcards or fantasy realms. They had to be alive, volatile, aching. And so, the filmmakers turned to a blend of cutting-edge technology and age-old artistry to create a visual language that felt as ancient as it was revolutionary. One of the first major innovations came with the simulation of water. The previous film had already set a high standard, but this time they reached for something deeper. Not just photorealism, but emotional realism. New simulation engines were developed that allowed water to feel emotions based on environmental cues. When the characters felt fear, the waves grew sharper, more chaotic. When hope rekindled, the tides settled into soft, rhythmic swells. It was not enough for the ocean to look convincing. It had to mirror the invisible currents running through the story's heart. Artists spent months studying how light behaves underwater, how currents twist colors and textures into living mosaics. Every scene set on the ocean was treated as a dynamic character interaction, not just a setting. Camera movements were designed to drift and sway as if filmed by a silent, ever-curious spirit riding the waves. The living island presented an even greater challenge. How do you animate a landmass that is both ancient and alive, both beautiful and broken? Traditional background painting techniques were thrown out the window. Instead, a new hybrid process was invented, one that combined procedural generation, letting computers grow parts of the landscape organically, with hand-sculpted details painted by artists who understood the emotional language of erosion, regrowth, and sorrow. Tiny, nearly invisible details were painstakingly added. Moss that shifted colors depending on the island's mood. Cracks in stone that widened and closed like slow, ancient breaths. Waterfalls that trembled when the island was in pain, their mist curling inward instead of out. These were things no casual viewer would consciously notice, but collectively they wove a spell, a silent language spoken between the world and the soul. Lighting and color grading became emotional actors in their own right. The filmmakers treated light not just as illumination, but as emotional temperature. Early scenes basked in the rich, honeyed gold of remembered safety. As the voyage deepened, the palette shifted, cooler tones, muted sunlight, shadows stretching longer even at midday. In moments of deepest despair, colors desaturated almost to monochrome, only to bloom back into vibrancy when hope flickered anew. Color was not just seen, it was felt in the gut, guiding the audience's emotional journey without ever shouting its presence. Sound design, too, was treated as sacred ground. The team recorded hundreds of hours of real-world ocean sounds, from crashing breakers to the gentle lapping of water against canoe hulls. But they didn't stop there. They built custom instruments, water drums, shell flutes, hollowed coral horns, to create a sonic texture that blended seamlessly with the natural world. Human-made sounds and nature's music intertwined until it became impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Every splash, every gust of wind, every creak of ancient trees was layered with care. In one breathtaking moment when the island sings in response to the chief's lullaby, the sound design team layered real whale songs, recordings of ice cracking in distant fjords, and slowed down human voices into a single keening note that rose and fell with the tides. It's a sound almost felt more than heard, a thrum of sorrow and hope that ripples through the bones. Editing choices reinforced the emotional rhythm of the story. Action scenes, while thrilling, often eschewed the typical frantic pace of modern blockbusters. Instead, editors allowed moments to stretch, to breathe. A single look exchanged across a boat's deck, a silent beat before a decision. These small pauses gave the film its weight, its gravity. It wasn't about relentless momentum. It was about journeying inward as much as outward. The mist sequences provided some of the most daring technical experiments. Rather than rely entirely on CGI, the filmmakers built miniature sets, tiny islands sculpted in exquisite detail, and flooded them with real mist, filming the results with high-speed cameras. The footage was then digitally blended with animation to create a surreal, tactile mist that felt different from anything audiences had seen before. This physicality grounded the dreamlike sequences in a way pure computer graphics never could have achieved. Performance capture also played a quiet, crucial role. Though the characters were animated, many key emotional scenes were filmed with the voice actors acting together on minimalist stages, their movements and interactions captured for the animators to study. This method lent a palpable authenticity to the way characters touched, argued, forgave. The small, unconscious gestures, a tightening of fingers, a glance away, a sag of the shoulders, carried through into the final animation, layering the story with human truth. And then there was the music. Rather than treat songs as separate set pieces, the filmmakers wove music into the very fabric of the film. Themes introduced in lullabies resurfaced as orchestral undercurrents during moments of choice and change. A gentle melody hummed by the young chief in private became the foundation for the triumphant closing score, creating an emotional continuity that bound the entire experience together. When it came time to bring this creation into the world, the filmmakers chose a careful, almost reverent release strategy. Rather than a traditional red carpet premiere in a big city, they debuted the film in a small coastal community, surrounded by ocean, stars, and stories that had shaped the very soul of the film. It was a gesture of gratitude, of acknowledgement that this story belonged not just to its creators, but to the generations who had sung to the sea long before a single frame was drawn. The box office response was a tidal wave. Audiences around the world connected not just with the beauty of the visuals or the thrill of the adventure, but with the deep, aching humanity at its core. Families returned to theaters multiple times, children singing the lullabies long after the credits rolled. Critics praised the film as a rare achievement, a spectacle that never lost sight of its soul. Within weeks, it shattered records for animated features, climbing steadily not just through dazzling opening weekends, but through the strength of word of mouth, through the quiet, steady current of people telling each other, "You have to see it. You have to feel it." It wasn't just a movie. It was a memory, a song, a prayer whispered across endless waters. The success story was not measured solely in dollars, though there were plenty of those, but in the ripples it sent out into the world. Environmental organizations praised its messages of stewardship. Educators used it to spark conversations about history, culture, and responsibility. Audiences spoke of feeling seen, uplifted, called to something greater. And back in the studio, the creators, those who had wrestled with servers and storms, who had painted with light and sound and memory, gathered one final time by the sea. They built small canoes, set them alight, and watched as they drifted out into the waves, carrying with them not just the story they had told, but the stories yet to come. Stories of oceans that remember, of islands that heal, of hearts that choose again and again to believe in the rising sun. And in that final shimmering glow, the filmmakers knew they had not just crafted a film. They had launched a vessel of hope across the endless, waiting waters. It all began, as it always does with stories destined to touch the soul, with a whisper. A whisper across blueprints and blank screens, across the silent hush of rooms where creators dreamed of breathing life into more than characters. They sought to breathe life into a world. From the first conceptual sketch to the last frame rendered in the deepest glow of midnight oil, the making of this film was not a mere act of production. It was a voyage of discovery, an ancient song translated into new languages of light, sound, and motion. The very first decision the filmmakers made set the course for everything that followed. This world could not feel manufactured. It had to feel inevitable, as if it had existed long before the audience arrived, pulsing with its own invisible rhythms. And so, every technique employed was chosen with the utmost reverence for authenticity and emotional truth. To build a world so large yet so intimate, animation technology had to leap forward in ways it had never before. Water, ever the film's breathing heart, presented the greatest challenge. While water had been animated before, rippling lakes, roaring waves, here it had to be more than scenery. It had to respond to characters' emotions, echo their triumphs, mourn their losses. A proprietary simulation system was developed, allowing the water to interact dynamically with characters in real time. Each splash, each crest, was a conversation, a silent language exchanged between the living ocean and the voyagers daring to traverse it. Animating the ocean demanded more than algorithms. Artists spent weeks by the shorelines, sketching and recording. They didn't just capture the ocean's form, they studied its moods. The way foam sighs on the rocks. The shudder before a wave collapses into itself. Light, too, was treated not as illumination but as memory. The filmmakers designed a custom lighting system that allowed sunlight to interact with water in heartbreakingly realistic ways, scattering, bending, vanishing, returning. Underwater sequences shimmered with beams of light that sliced through gloom, capturing the loneliness of being adrift in a world where direction was no longer clear. Above water, sunsets bled across skies in colors too rich to name, mirroring the characters' internal transformations. And then there was the living island. No ordinary terrain could tell the story of a wounded, breathing land yearning for healing. Using procedural generation techniques blended with hand-painted textures, the creative team allowed the island to shift subtly from moment to moment. A river would tighten its coils in anxiety. Trees would lean closer, listening or retreating. Even the rocks seemed to slump or stand taller depending on the island's invisible mood. This was not a place the characters walked upon, it was a place they spoke with, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in sorrow. Cinematography took cues from classic seafaring epics and intimate character dramas alike. Wide shots framed the characters as small, fragile figures against endless horizons, emphasizing the vastness of their undertaking. But when the story demanded intimacy, a whispered fear, a stolen glance, the camera moved in, handheld and breathing, as if it too were just another traveler aboard the fragile canoe. Every choice in lensing and framing was guided by emotion. During scenes of despair, the camera tilted ever so slightly, making the world feel askew, unstable. In moments of hope, it lifted gently, aligning once again with the horizon, restoring balance without needing a single word spoken. Editing followed the same principle. Action scenes flowed with rhythmic intensity, each cut driven not by spectacle but by character motivation. Emotional scenes lingered, unafraid of silence, allowing the audience to sit in the ache or joy of a moment without rushing to the next beat. Sound design became a symphony of the unseen world. To evoke the feeling of a world both familiar and mythic, the sound team captured not just traditional effects, waves, gulls, winds, but layered them with deeper, stranger textures. The creak of ancient wood was blended with low-frequency moans, suggesting the memories carried in every fiber of the canoe. Wind howls carried faint echoes of lost songs, so faint that most would only feel them subliminally. Every breath of the environment was designed to wrap around the audience, pulling them deeper into a world that was not fantasy, but a forgotten truth. Music wove itself into the fabric of every scene, not as an afterthought but as a lifeblood. Traditional Polynesian instruments, pahu drums, nose flutes, conch shells, were recorded live and treated with modern production techniques to create a soundscape that felt timeless. Vocals, often wordless, rose and fell like tides, carrying the audience along emotional currents they didn't even realize they were riding. Themes were planted early, tiny motifs hidden in lullabies or background melodies, only to blossom later into full orchestrations at key emotional climaxes. Perhaps the most quietly revolutionary choice was the approach to silence. Where other films might fear empty space, here silence became a canvas. The absence of sound was used with breathtaking precision, a sudden hush as the mist closed around the canoe, the quiet gasp of a star being swallowed by clouds, the solemn pause before a song remembered. These silences spoke with the eloquence of 1,000 words, inviting the audience not just to observe, but to listen, deeply, vulnerably. The box office journey mirrored the film's emotional journey in unexpected ways. Initial marketing was subtle, eschewing bombast for wonder. Trailers hinted at the emotional depth without revealing the full breadth of the story, trusting audiences to be drawn not by spectacle alone, but by the promise of something felt rather than just seen. Opening weekend surpassed expectations, but it was the following weeks that told the real story. Word of mouth spread like a quiet tide. Families returned to theaters multiple times. Schools organized field trips. Community groups hosted discussions about stewardship and tradition. Critics praised the film not just for its visual splendor, but for its courage, its willingness to be sincere in a world grown cynical. Awards soon followed. Best Animated Feature, Best Sound Design, Best Original Score. But beyond the glittering trophies, the filmmakers found their greatest reward in quieter spaces. Letters from children who had found new courage, messages from elders grateful to see ancestral traditions honored with such reverence, songs hummed by new generations who would remember the ocean's call long after the credits faded. In total, the film became one of the highest-grossing animated releases of its era, but more importantly, it became a part of the cultural bloodstream, a touchstone for conversations about memory, healing, and hope. Looking back, the filmmakers spoke of the experience not in terms of technical achievements or financial milestones, but in moments. The night a lighting artist wept quietly after perfecting a sunrise. The day a voice actor improvised a line so truthful that it redefined an entire character arc. The long, aching final mix session where the sound of a single wave crashing against stone left the room in silence, reverent and full of wonder. They spoke of the story as something they had not merely made, but found. Something waiting for them just beyond the horizon, something older and wiser than any of them. And as the world continued to sing back the songs they had stitched into its fabric, they knew, deep in their bones, that they had not just made a film. They had answered the ocean's call. And the ocean, timeless and wild, had answered back. The magic of a story often lies not just in the landscapes it paints or the journeys it charts, but in the souls who breathe life into its every corner. Long before the waves crashed against animated shores, before a single melody floated across cinema speakers, it was the cast, voices and spirits intertwined, who wove themselves into the very fabric of the tale. And it was the audiences, sitting in the darkened hush of theaters, who completed the circle, answering that call with laughter, tears, and whispered awe. From the moment casting began, the filmmakers knew they weren't simply looking for actors. They were seeking travelers, dreamers, bearers of old songs and new hopes. It wasn't about marquee names or glittering resumes. It was about finding those rare souls who could step into the skin of ancient voyagers, wounded tricksters, healing islands, and wayfinding chiefs, and make them real. The return of the young chief's voice actress felt less like a professional agreement and more like a homecoming.